My husband stopped seeing me after 40 years. Then his boss said this. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I never imagined I'd find myself at this crossroads at 62. Life was supposed to be predictable by now, settled, steady. After all, I had spent decades building a life with Mark, weaving a tapestry of routines, traditions, and unspoken understandings. We had been a team, navigating the ebb and flow of marriage, raising children, building careers, planning for retirement. I had convinced myself that this quiet, unwavering commitment, was enough. But something had been shifting for years, an undercurrent I chose to ignore, brushing it aside as nothing more than the natural evolution of a long marriage. Passion was fleeting, I told myself. The dizzying spark of new love always gave way to something calmer, something deeper. Marriage, real marriage, wasn't about being seen or desired, it was about endurance. Yet, in the dimly lit lounge of the Grand Astoria Hotel, across from Richard Caldwell, my husband's boss, a man I barely knew beyond the occasional pleasantries at corporate functions, I realized the illusion of stability had already begun to crack. And with one sentence, he shattered it completely. Your husband no longer sees you. The words hung between us, heavy, final. I stared at him, willing myself to dismiss them, to laugh them off as some misunderstanding. But Richard Caldwell wasn't a man prone to dramatics. His expression was calm, almost regretful, as if he were merely delivering a truth he assumed I already knew. The room around me seemed to shrink. The distant hum of laughter and clinking glasses from the gala in the next room faded, replaced by the pounding of my own heartbeat. What? My voice came out thinner than I intended, laced with something dangerously close to fear. Richard exhaled slowly, as if weighing his next words. Mark has changed, hasn't he? His gaze was steady, assessing. The way he looks through you at dinners, the way he no longer reaches for your hand, the way he forgets to ask how your day was. A lump formed in my throat. I had spent years making excuses for these very things. Mark was busy. He was preoccupied. He was tired. He sees other people, Eleanor. Richard's voice softened, but the impact of his words was brutal. But he doesn't see you. My breath caught. This was ridiculous. Mark was a good man. A reliable husband. Sure, our marriage had settled into something quieter, something less urgent, but wasn't that normal? And yet, a part of me, a part I had buried for too long, whispered that Richard wasn't telling me anything I didn't already know. Mark had stopped looking at me years ago. The illusion cracks. I pressed my palms against the cool marble table, grounding myself. Why are you telling me this? Richard hesitated, then leaned forward, his tone even. Because I've seen too many women sit in the same seat you're in right now, pretending they don't already know the truth. And because he exhaled, almost regretfully, I respect you, Eleanor. Respect. A word I had not associated with myself in a long time. A slow, simmering anger stirred beneath my ribs, not at Richard, but at myself. How had I let this happen? When had I stopped demanding to be seen? And why, after all these years, was it a stranger who finally said out loud what I had refused to acknowledge? Mark hadn't just fallen out of love with me. He had stopped seeing me as a woman entirely. I thought back to the last time he had looked at me, truly looked at me. Not with obligation or absent-minded politeness, but with admiration, desire. Had it been years? A decade? Longer? The realization made my stomach twist. Richard's voice cut through my thoughts. I don't mean to hurt you. But I think you deserve to know. I studied him, this man who had nothing to gain from telling me any of this. I had always thought of him as a detached figure, powerful, shrewd, but ultimately indifferent to anything outside of boardroom politics. Yet here he was, offering me something that my own husband hadn't in years, honesty. I picked up my champagne flute with steady hands and took a slow sip, my pulse finally beginning to slow. You must think I'm a fool, I murmured. Richard shook his head. No. I think you're a woman who deserves more than to be invisible. The night that changed everything. A burst of laughter from the ballroom beyond the lounge doors reminded me that the world was still spinning, that somewhere beyond this conversation, people were dancing, celebrating, clinking glasses to empty toasts. I thought about returning to that room, to Mark's side, playing the role of the dutiful wife for the remainder of the evening. But I couldn't. Not anymore. For years, I had told myself that stability was enough, that the slow erosion of intimacy was inevitable. But now, sitting across from Richard Caldwell, I realized stability was nothing more than an illusion I had clung to out of fear. Mark had already moved on, whether with another woman, with his work, or simply with the version of himself that no longer included me. The only question left was, what was I going to do about it? A sharp breath filled my lungs as I set my glass down, decision settling like steel in my bones. This night was no longer just another gala. It was the beginning of something else. Something I couldn't yet name. But for the first time in years, I knew one thing for certain. I would no longer be invisible. The house was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Mark lay beside me, his back turned as he always slept, his breathing deep and steady. I lay staring at the ceiling, Richard's words playing on an endless loop in my mind. You deserve to be seen. Something so simple. So obvious. Yet, as the words settled into my bones, I realized how foreign they felt, like a language I had once spoken fluently but had long forgotten. For years, I had told myself that love changed shape over time, that passion gave way to comfort, that routine was the foundation of a lasting marriage. But when had that comfort turned to distance? When had silence stopped feeling like companionship and started feeling like loneliness? I turned onto my side, watching the rise and fall of Mark's back. The man I had loved for decades, the man I had promised my life to. His profile was familiar, unchanged in all the years we had shared a bed. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was a stranger to me now. I closed my eyes and tried to remember. When had that changed? Then, the beginning of us. The first time I saw Mark, it was the summer of 1983. He was leaning against his old Chevy, arms crossed, that boyish smile lighting up his face as I walked out of the coffee shop with my best friend. Are you gonna stand there looking at me, or are you gonna introduce yourself? He had teased. I had rolled my eyes, pretending to be unimpressed, but something about his confidence had been magnetic. He had a way of making everything feel effortless, from the way he spoke to the way he slid into my life as if he had always belonged there. We spent that summer driving with the windows down, the wind tangling my hair as he sang off-key to whatever song was playing on the radio. He wrote me love notes on napkins, tucked them into my purse, left them on my car windshield. Eleanor, you are my best adventure. For years, we were inseparable, spontaneous road trips just to chase sunsets, long conversations about our future over greasy diner pancakes at midnight, the quiet intimacy of holding hands under the table at dinner parties. He used to watch me, really watch me, like I was the most fascinating thing in the room. When had that changed? Now, a marriage on autopilot. I opened my eyes to the darkness of our bedroom. Decades had passed since those wild, reckless days. Life had happened. Careers. Kids. Mortgages. Responsibilities. Somewhere along the way, the notes had stopped, the road trips had become carefully planned vacations, and the easy laughter we once shared had been replaced with quiet nods across the dinner table. I told myself it was normal. That this was marriage, real marriage. That passion faded, but what we had built was stronger than passion. But now, lying next to Mark, I realized how much of myself I had lost in the process. I thought about the last time he had truly seen me, not out of obligation, not in passing, but really seen me. Had it been years? A decade? The weight of that truth pressed against my ribs. I turned onto my back again, staring up at the ceiling, exhaustion wrapping around me like a heavy cloak. But sleep wouldn't come. The first fracture. The next morning, I moved through the house in a haze. Mark sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, flipping through the morning paper like he had done every day for the past 20 years. I stood at the counter, gripping my mug. Watching him. Would he notice if I didn't say good morning? If I walked out of the room without a word? Would he look up? A lump formed in my throat. I thought about Richard. About the way his voice had softened when he said those words to me. You deserve to be seen. Mark turned the page of his newspaper. I swallowed. Did you enjoy the gala last night? He didn't look up. Oh. Yeah. It was nice. I waited, hoping he would ask me if I had enjoyed it too, If I had a good time. If I had felt beautiful in the gown I had spent weeks searching for. He didn't. I pressed my lips together and forced a smile. I saw Richard Caldwell last night. That got his attention. He finally looked up, brow furrowed. Richard? What did he want? The way he said it, like it was business, like it was about work, stung more than it should have. I shook my head. Nothing. Just talked for a bit. Mark studied me for a moment, then gave a noncommittal nod and went back to his paper. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and ask, "Do you even see me anymore?" But instead, I turned back to the sink and rinsed out my coffee mug, the water scalding against my hands. Doubt takes root. That afternoon, I wandered through our home, really looking at it for the first time in years. The walls were lined with photos, our wedding, vacations, family holidays. Evidence of a life well lived. A marriage that had survived. But was survival the same as happiness? I sat on the edge of our bed, running my fingers over the lace trim of the throw blanket I had picked out last Christmas. When had I stopped feeling alive in my own home? I thought about the version of myself I had been when I met Mark, the girl who danced barefoot in the kitchen, who read poetry out loud in bed, who kissed with laughter on her lips. That girl felt like a ghost now. That night, as Mark climbed into bed beside me, I turned to him. "Mark," I said softly. He was already half asleep. "Do you remember the last time you wrote me a love note?" There was a pause. He opened his eyes, blinking at me in the dim light. "What?" I swallowed hard. "You used to write me little notes. Leave them in my purse. On the bathroom mirror." He exhaled, running a hand over his face. "That was a long time ago, Elle." "I know," I said quickly, not wanting to sound accusatory. I was thinking about it." He sighed. "We were kids back then." "We weren't just kids," I whispered. He reached for my hand, giving it a quick squeeze before turning onto his side. "I love you, Elle. Get some sleep." I stared at his back, my chest aching. Love. It had been a long time since love felt like enough. A spark ignites. For the next few days, doubt followed me like a shadow. I found myself studying Mark in ways I never had before, searching for something, anything, that would prove Richard wrong. That would prove me wrong. But instead, I saw what had been there all along. The way he scrolled through his phone at dinner instead of meeting my eyes. The way he barely touched me in passing anymore, as if the simple act of placing a hand on my back or brushing a strand of hair from my face had become unnecessary. The way we had become polite strangers in our own home. And so, when my phone buzzed one afternoon with a message from an unknown number, my heart clenched in my chest. "Richard Caldwell, I hope you're doing okay. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I knew responding would be dangerous. That opening a door, even one as small as a text message, could lead somewhere I wasn't sure I was ready to go. But as I looked around my silent house, at the empty space beside me on the couch, at the wedding photo hanging on the wall that no longer felt like my life, I typed 2 words. "Thank you." And with that, the first crack in my carefully built world widened just a little more. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting soft golden streaks on the countertop. I stood by the coffee maker, my hands wrapped around my mug, trying to will warmth into my body. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from the autumn air seeping through the house, it was something deeper, something that had settled into my bones long before this morning. Mark was seated at the kitchen table, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through his phone, his coffee untouched beside him. His morning routine never wavered, emails first, breakfast second, a quick goodbye, and then he was out the door. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. "Say something. Ask him." "Mark," I started, my voice deliberately light, almost casual. "Do you ever think about when we first met?" He hummed absently, still focused on his screen. "Yeah, of course. Why?" I watched him, searching for something, acknowledgement, nostalgia, even the smallest flicker of recognition in his face. "I don't know," I admitted. "Just. Things were different then, weren't they?" That finally got his attention. He put his phone down and looked at me. "Well, sure. We were young. But, Evelyn, we have a good life now. We've built something together. That's what matters. He wasn't wrong. But then why did it feel like he was missing the point? I forced a smile, nodding as if his answer had satisfied me. Yeah. You're right. Mark stood, grabbing his briefcase. As he passed me, he kissed my cheek, a gesture so practiced, so automatic, that it barely registered. See you tonight, he said before heading for the door. I followed him to the doorway, watching as he climbed into his car and backed out of the driveway. The words I truly wanted to say, the ones that had been pressing against my chest all morning, never made it past my lips. The unfinished conversations. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small, meaningless tasks. I went to the grocery store, folded the laundry, wiped down the counters, all the little things that made up the rhythm of my days. And yet, through all of it, I felt like I was living in a house full of ghosts. The ghost of who I used to be. The ghost of the marriage I thought I had. The ghost of all the conversations Mark and I never had. As I tidied up the bedroom, I pulled open the nightstand drawer to put away a book. My fingers brushed against something at the back, an old folded-up napkin. My heart clenched as I pulled it out, already knowing what it was. One of Mark's love notes. The ink was faded, but the words were still clear. Eleanor, you are my best adventure. I sat down on the bed, the napkin trembling slightly in my hands. When had he stopped writing these? More importantly, when had I stopped noticing? A familiar voice. That evening, I sat on the couch with a book, though I wasn't really reading. Mark was in his office, door slightly ajar, typing away on his laptop. I could hear the occasional murmur of his voice as he took calls. And then, my phone buzzed. Richard Caldwell, thinking of you today. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at the message, my breath catching in my throat. It had been days since I last saw him, but his words from the gala had remained with me, taking root in the quiet corners of my mind. You deserve to be seen. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. I should ignore it. I should delete the message and pretend I never saw it. But then I thought about this morning. About Mark's distracted nod, his absence even when he was in the room. About all the moments I had swallowed my feelings, convinced myself they weren't worth mentioning. And so, before I could second-guess myself, I typed back 2 words. Thank you. Dinner for 2, conversation for 1. When Mark finally emerged from his office, it was nearly 8. Hey, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Sorry, I lost track of time. I gestured to the table, where I had already set dinner. I figured. I kept your plate warm. He smiled, grateful but tired. You're the best. I sat across from him as he started eating, watching as he scrolled through his phone between bites. How was work? I asked, keeping my tone light. Busy. Meetings all day. You? Not much. Just errands. Went through some old things. Found one of your love notes. His fork paused midair, and for a split second, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe? Guilt? Then it was gone. He smiled faintly. Wow. That's old. I let out a soft chuckle, but it didn't reach my eyes. Yeah. It was nice, though. Reading it. Mark nodded but didn't say anything. He didn't ask which note. Didn't ask why I had brought it up. Another conversation left unfinished. A shift in the air. That night, as Mark brushed his teeth, I stood by the bedroom window, staring out at the darkened street. A quiet ache sat heavy in my chest. I had always thought of marriage as something unbreakable. But now, I was beginning to realize that marriages didn't shatter all at once. They eroded, slowly, imperceptibly, through all the little things left unsaid. Mark walked past me and climbed into bed, flipping off the lamp on his side. I hesitated, then turned to him. Do you ever think we should talk more? His brow furrowed. What do you mean? I don't know. I bit my lip. Just about us. About how we're feeling. Mark exhaled, shifting onto his side. Evelyn, is something wrong? I hesitated. Yes. No. I don't know. I just want to make sure we're not losing something important, I said carefully. Mark reached for my hand under the covers and gave it a gentle squeeze. We're fine, Elle. Really? We've been together forever. We don't have to talk about everything all the time. We just We know each other. I forced a smile, nodding. Yeah. You're right. But as I lay in the dark, Mark's hand still wrapped around mine, I had never felt lonelier. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if that loneliness would ever go away. The invitation hovered between my lips and the receiver, unspoken for just a moment too long. I should hang up. I should press end and pretend I never even started to dial. But I didn't. The truth was, Richard Caldwell's words hadn't just unsettled me, they had cracked something open, something I wasn't sure I could close again. You deserve to be seen. A simple phrase, but it had followed me through the last few days like a shadow. It lingered in the quiet moments when I stood in front of the mirror, tracing the faint lines around my eyes. It whispered through the pauses in conversation with Mark, in the absence of laughter, in the way he always looked past me instead of at me. So when Richard's voice came through the line, carrying that same deep timbre, that same quiet confidence, I didn't hang up. "Evelyn?" he said, and I could hear the faintest note of surprise. I took a slow breath, steadying myself against the rush of guilt threatening to rise. "It's just coffee. Do you have time for a cup of coffee?" A beat of silence. Then, warm and certain. "For you?" "Always." A choice made. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. I told myself I needed time to think, but in truth, I needed a moment to catch my breath. The cafe was a small, quiet place on the corner of a street I used to visit often in my 20s, back when I still had spontaneous coffee dates and long, winding conversations about nothing and everything. Back when Mark and I would spend hours in places like this, lost in each other's words. Now, I sat alone, stirring a cup of tea I hadn't taken a sip of, waiting for a man who wasn't my husband. The door chimed, and I felt it before I saw him, the shift in the air, the way my body tensed with something that felt dangerously close to anticipation. Richard was exactly as I remembered from the gala, poised, effortlessly confident. He wasn't the kind of a handsome that turned heads in a room, but there was something about him, an understated presence that made people listen when he spoke. He spotted me immediately and made his way over, his dark eyes scanning my face as if searching for something. "Evelyn." His voice was warm, unhurried, and for reasons I couldn't quite explain, that single word made my throat tighten. I managed a smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Nothing that couldn't wait." He sat down across from me, setting his phone face down on the table. A small gesture, but one that didn't go unnoticed. I wasn't used to being the most important presence in someone's immediate world. Not anymore. Dancing around the truth. For the first 10 minutes, we talked about everything but the reason we were here. Safe things. Superficial things. The weather. The cafe's pastries. His upcoming travel schedule. It was a delicate dance, both of us circling the real conversation like cautious animals sniffing at something that might bite. But then Richard leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting, darkening with something more serious. "Evelyn." I set my tea down, my fingers tightening around the handle. "Yes? You don't owe me an explanation for calling." He paused. "But I think we both know why you did." The words settled between us, heavy and undeniable. I swallowed. Looked away. "I don't know what you mean." He exhaled, shaking his head with something that wasn't quite amusement but wasn't quite frustration either. "Evelyn, don't do that. Don't pretend you don't feel it." "Feel what?" I whispered, barely able to hear my own voice over the pounding of my heart. His gaze softened. The weight of being unseen. And there it was. The truth laid bare in 6 words. I let out a quiet, unsteady breath, pressing my lips together to keep them from trembling. "I shouldn't have come," I said, but I made no move to leave. Richard didn't argue. He simply watched me for a moment, then spoke in a voice so gentle it almost undid me. "You don't have to say anything, Evelyn. But just for once. Just for right now. Let yourself be honest." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But honesty was dangerous. Because once you started telling the truth, you couldn't take it back. What was missing? I thought about my marriage. About the love notes that had stopped appearing. About the quiet dinners filled with nothing but the sound of Mark's phone buzzing with work emails. About the unspoken conversations that had been swallowed and buried so deep they had become part of the walls of our home. And I thought about Richard, about how he saw things Mark didn't. About how, in a single conversation, he had managed to see me in a way my husband hadn't in years. I wasn't naive. This wasn't about Richard. This wasn't about attraction or temptation or anything scandalous. It was about something far more dangerous. It was about remembering what it felt like to be wanted, to be considered, to be heard. And once you remembered that feeling, how were you ever supposed to go back? A moment of clarity. I looked at Richard then, really looked at him. And I saw it, understanding. Patience. Not pity, but something softer. Something that felt like recognition. I let out a quiet breath. I don't know how I got here. You didn't just wake up one day and find yourself here, Evelyn, Richard said gently. You arrived here, step by step. The real question is, what do you want to do now? I didn't have an answer. But for the first time in a long time, I knew I had a choice. And that was terrifying. A goodbye that didn't feel like one. When we finally stood to leave, Richard reached for my coat, helping me slip it on. It was such an old-fashioned, thoughtful gesture that it caught me off guard. Thank you, I murmured. He gave me a small smile, stepping back. I meant what I said at the gala, you know. I met his gaze. About what? That you deserved to be seen. A lump formed in my throat, and I could do nothing but nod. I turned to leave, my heart pounding, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. But just before I stepped out the door, I heard his voice once more, quiet but certain. Evelyn. I paused. If you ever need to talk, he said, I'm here. I didn't look back. But the worst part? I wanted to. The cafe was quiet, nestled near the lake, where the scent of roasted coffee mingled with the crispness of autumn leaves. The world outside was painted in warm hues of orange and red, but inside, the space between us felt heavier, like the weight of unspoken truths pressing against the air. Richard was already seated when I arrived, a cup of black coffee in front of him, untouched. He watched me as I slid into the seat across from him, his expression calm, unreadable. I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you, he said finally. I stirred my coffee, watching the swirls of cream disappear into the dark liquid. I wasn't sure if I'd call. He nodded but said nothing, giving me space. I exhaled, shifting in my seat. I've been thinking about what you said. His fingers tapped lightly against the ceramic of his cup, but his eyes never left mine. And I hesitated, the words fragile on my tongue. Then I met his gaze and forced myself to say the truth I'd been avoiding. You were right. Something flickered across his face, not triumph, not satisfaction, just quiet understanding. Evelyn, I wasn't trying to. I don't regret my life, I interrupted gently. Mark and I have built something strong, something real. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot how to want something for myself. Richard leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. And now? I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the coffee cup. Now, I don't know. He sighed, leaning back. That feeling, the one you're describing, I know it well. I looked up at him. Do you? His lips pressed together in a small, almost wry smile. More than you might think. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he reached for his coffee, took a slow sip, and set it down carefully, as if choosing his next words with equal precision. I wasn't always this perceptive, you know, he said finally. I made my own mistakes. My wife, ex-wife, used to say the same thing to me, in her own way. That I never truly saw her. Something in my chest tightened. You were married? He nodded. For 28 years. I blinked. That's a long time. Yes, he murmured. It was. His gaze drifted for a moment, as if looking back at something only he could see. Her name was Lillian, he continued, his voice softer now. We had everything, or at least, that's what I thought. A home, careers we were proud of, children we adored. But what I didn't realize was that over the years, I stopped noticing her. Stopped seeing the small things. The way she hesitated before speaking, the way she lingered at the dinner table, waiting for me to ask about her day. She started disappearing right in front of me, and I didn't even see it happening. I swallowed, the weight of his confession pressing into my own unspoken fears. What happened? I asked quietly. One day, I woke up, and she was gone. His voice wasn't bitter, just tired. She left a note on the kitchen counter. Said she loved me, but she was tired of feeling invisible. He let out a slow breath. I never got to fix it. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he looked back at me, his gaze steady. I suppose that's why I noticed it in you, he said softly. Because I recognized the look. I gripped my coffee cup tighter. I wanted to say it's different, but was it? I wanted to say Mark isn't you, but was he? I wanted to say I'm not leaving, but how could I be sure? Richard studied me carefully. Evelyn, I don't say this to push you one way or the other. I say it because I wish someone had said it to me sooner. I met his gaze. What do I do, Richard? His answer was quiet, but firm. That's something only you can decide. The ghosts of past choices. I turned his words over in my mind as I drove home, the road stretching endlessly ahead of me. The weight of his confession settled deep in my bones, making my own thoughts feel even heavier. At home, I stepped inside to the familiar quiet of my house. Mark's shoes were neatly placed by the door, his coat draped over the back of a chair. The scent of his cologne still lingered in the air, a scent I once adored, but now barely noticed. I walked into the kitchen, where the remnants of our morning routine were still scattered across the counter. Mark's coffee cup, a half-eaten piece of toast, his laptop where he had left it. It was the same scene I saw every day. But tonight, it felt different. Because I could see all the places where I had disappeared. The way I had stopped setting out 2 cups of coffee, because Mark always rushed out the door. The way my books gathered dust on the shelf, unread, because I had long since given up on curling up beside him at night with a novel in hand. The way I had learned to sit in silence at dinner, knowing he was too preoccupied to ask how my day had been. Little by little, I had faded. Just like Lillian. An unfinished conversation. I was still sitting at the kitchen table when I heard the front door open. Mark walked in, his tie slightly loosened, exhaustion evident in his posture. Hey, he said absently, setting his briefcase down. Long day. I studied him, really studied him. The lines on his face were deeper than they used to be. His shoulders carried tension that never seemed to ease. I wanted to ask him if he remembered what it felt like to see me. I wanted to ask him if he had noticed how much I had changed. But instead, I asked, "Did you eat?" He nodded, pulling out his phone, already scrolling through something. Yeah. Had a quick bite with some colleagues. I watched as he moved around the kitchen, checking emails, muttering something about a meeting tomorrow. I wanted to say I had coffee with someone today. I wanted to say he told me a story about his wife leaving him, and it scared me. I wanted to say I don't want to disappear. But instead, I just said, okay. And Mark, oblivious, simply kissed my cheek and walked away. A question that lingered. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me. I should have felt comforted by his presence. But instead, all I felt was the echo of Richard's words. That's something only you can decide. I turned onto my side, facing away from my husband, and closed my eyes. For the first time, I wasn't sure if sleep would come. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted it to. A restlessness I couldn't name. I tried to return to normal after my conversation with Richard. I really did. I woke up beside Mark each morning, moved through the house the same way I always had, poured my coffee in the same old mug, drove the same route to the grocery store, cooked the same meals, laughed in the right places, nodded at the right times. On the surface, nothing had changed. But I had. It was as if someone had twisted the lens of my life, sharpening the details I had once overlooked. The empty spaces in my marriage now stood in stark relief, like shadows in the corners of my vision I could no longer ignore. I started noticing the way Mark and I barely touched anymore. How our conversations were more transactional than affectionate. How his presence in a room no longer filled it the way it once had. I noticed the way I moved around him like a ghost. The silence between us had once been comforting. Now, it was suffocating. And the worst part? Mark noticed. Something's off. You've been quiet lately, he remarked one evening, watching me from across the dinner table. I glanced up from my plate, startled by his observation. I hadn't expected him to say anything. I forced a smile. Just thinking. He nodded slowly, as if considering whether to push further, then went back to his food. The moment passed, slipping between us like so many others before it. But as I watched him eat, the light from the overhead chandelier casting soft shadows across his face, I felt something tighten in my chest. I wanted him to ask more. I wanted him to see me. But he didn't. He never did. Living in the echoes. That night, after Mark fell asleep, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the closed door of our bedroom. My own reflection stared back at me from the mirror across the room, unfamiliar, almost ghost-like. I reached for my phone before I could stop myself. My fingers hovered over Richard's name. I didn't call. But I wanted to. I set the phone down and turned to look at my husband. He lay still, his breathing deep and even. I used to love watching him sleep. I used to press my hand to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, anchoring myself to the life we had built together. Now, I felt like a stranger lying beside him. I climbed under the covers and faced away from him, staring into the dark. I thought about Richard. About the regret in his voice when he spoke of his ex-wife. About the way he had said he wished someone had warned him before it was too late. And then I thought about Mark. About our love, now faded. About the years we had spent together, and how somewhere along the way, I had stopped reaching for him. Or maybe he had stopped reaching for me first. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. What do you truly want? Fractures in the foundation. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Mark's voice in the bathroom. He was on a call, his tone brisk, efficient. The voice of a man who was always in control. I listened to him talk about meetings, deadlines, projections, his world, his priorities. When he walked back into the bedroom, he barely glanced at me. Busy day today, he said absently, buttoning his cuffs. I watched him for a long moment. Mark. He paused, glancing up. Yeah? I hesitated. Tell him. Say something. Say anything. But the words wouldn't come. I swallowed. Never mind. He nodded, already moving on. Already elsewhere. See you tonight. And just like that, he was gone. I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling, feeling the slow unraveling of something I once thought was unbreakable. A flicker of awareness. A week passed. Then two. The restlessness inside me didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. I moved through my days half present, caught between longing and resignation. Mark continued to sense something was off, though he never quite grasped what it was. One evening, as we stood side by side in the kitchen, washing dishes after dinner, he turned to me suddenly. Are you happy? I almost dropped the plate I was holding. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. What? He frowned slightly, studying me. I don't know. You've just been distant. I stared at him, trying to find the words. Trying to decide if I could say the truth out loud. Mark. His phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it. Sorry, 1 second. I watched as he picked up the call, his attention shifting instantly. By the time he hung up, the moment had passed. He kissed my forehead absently and walked away. And I let him. The breaking point. One afternoon, I went for a drive with no destination in mind. The road stretched ahead of me, endless and uncertain. I thought of Richard's story. I thought of Lillian's note. I thought of all the moments in my own marriage where I had stayed silent. I pulled over at a small park near the edge of town, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The question I had been avoiding clawed its way to the surface. Do I stay? Or do I go? Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. I loved Mark. I knew I did. But love wasn't the question anymore. The question was whether love alone was enough. I reached for my phone. And this time, I didn't hesitate. I dialed Richard's number. He answered on the second ring. Evelyn? I exhaled shakily. I don't know what to do. There was a long pause. Then, softly, do you want to meet? I closed my eyes. Yes. A ghost in my own life. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. I sat on the edge of our bed, an old photograph resting between my fingers, the edges soft and worn from years of handling. It was a picture from a summer long ago, Mark and me on the beach, sun-kissed and laughing, his arm slung around my shoulder as if he never wanted to let go. I traced the outline of his face with my thumb, The image blurred through the tears I refused to shed. Where had that man gone? Where had we gone? Downstairs, the clock on the wall chimed. Mark still wasn't home. I knew where he was, his office, his meetings, his world where I no longer seemed to exist. I closed my eyes, pressing the photograph to my chest. And I made a decision. A moment of truth. The front door creaked open just past 10. I stood in the dimly lit hallway, my hands clenched at my sides. Mark stepped inside, setting his briefcase down with the ease of a man accustomed to routine. When he looked up and saw me standing there, he hesitated. "Evelyn?" His voice held the faintest trace of surprise. "You're still up?" I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Yes. I was waiting for you." His brows furrowed. "Is something wrong?" I searched his face, looking for something, anything, that told me he already knew the answer. But there was only mild concern, the kind you offer when something is slightly off, but not important enough to derail your plans. A lump formed in my throat. He really doesn't see it, does he? I forced myself to stand taller. "Mark," I said, my voice steady. "Do you see me?" He blinked, caught off guard. "What?" I swallowed past the ache in my chest. "Do you see me, Mark? As a person? As your wife? As someone who still has dreams, feelings, and needs?" His confusion deepened, shifting into something unreadable. "Evelyn, what's this about?" A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "That's exactly it," I whispered. "You don't even know." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Come on, Evelyn. It's late. Let's just..." "No." I cut him off, my voice stronger than I expected. "Not this time. I'm not letting this go." He hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "All right. What do you want me to say?" I stared at him, my heart aching. "That you see me. That you remember who I am beyond this house, beyond the schedule, beyond being the woman who stands beside you while you live your life." Mark frowned. "Evelyn, we've been married for 40 years. Of course I see you." "No, you don't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "If you did, you'd know I've been disappearing piece by piece for years. And you wouldn't have let it happen." He took a step forward, but I stepped back. A flicker of something crossed his face, hurt, frustration, maybe even guilt. "That's not fair," he muttered. I laughed again, but there was no joy in it. "Isn't it?" The silence between us stretched, heavier than ever before. And then, Mark looked away. That single movement, so small, so effortless, told me everything I needed to know. The moment I knew, I waited. For him to deny it. For him to fight. For him to say anything that might mean he still cared enough to reach for me. But he said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on the floor, his hands in his pockets. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that Mark loved me. But he no longer saw me. And maybe he hadn't for a long, long time. Something inside me cracked, deep and irrevocable. I thought of Richard's regret. The way his wife had walked away without him ever realizing she was already gone. And I realized I was standing at the edge of the same precipice. I could walk back. Pretend none of this had happened. Or I could finally step forward. Into the unknown. Into the terrifying, heartbreaking possibility of something more. A choice. I turned, walking toward the staircase. "Evelyn." Mark's voice stopped me halfway up. I looked over my shoulder. He stood where I had left him, hesitation flickering across his face. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. "I'm tired, Mark," I said softly. And this time, I didn't just mean for the night. I left him standing there. And I didn't look back. The house was eerily silent. Mark had gone to bed without another word, but I had stayed downstairs, curled up on the couch, staring at the shadows stretching across the walls. Do I stay? The question pressed against my ribs, suffocating in its weight. If I stayed, nothing would change. Mark would wake up in the morning, pour his coffee, and kiss my cheek out of habit. We would go back to existing beside each other, not together. If I left, I swallowed hard. Then what? I wasn't a woman in her 20s, walking away from a love that hadn't yet taken root. This was my whole life. But what was a life if you spent it unseen? A creak on the stairs pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Mark standing at the bottom, his face weary, his hands shoved into the pockets of his pajama pants. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, he asked, "Are you leaving?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because I didn't know. Not yet. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid to find out. To be continued.